Hi, everybody in Luqman Nation. This is Jackie Luqman, and this is a special edition of Live in Luqman Nation. Today is Thursday, December 28th, and we're just about at the end of 2017. And I know that we said that we weren't going to do any more shows until the new year, but I really just couldn't avoid doing this one. So I'm going to give you guys a chance to hop on. I'm trying to monitor the stream quality over here. Let me know if you are having problems with the audio, and I'll try to fix that. I'm seeing that I've got some dropped frames. This is always such a chore. Why? It's just so difficult to do sometimes when you don't have a production team, when it's just you. But we're gonna try to get through this and do the best we can. And I hope that what I talk about tonight is going to be helpful for you in how we go forward, especially from a perspective of the kind of stuff we need to stop allowing to be the center of discussion when we're talking about racial justice in particular. So let me see what is going on with our stream. Let me make sure. Oh, that's interesting. It didn't come up over here. Let me make sure that it is live where it should be. And oddly enough, it is not live on Facebook. I don't know why. Let me see what's going on here, guys. Sorry about that. Oh, yes, it is. Yes, it is. I didn't realize that I am live. I couldn't see it. So I'm going to give you guys just a couple of more minutes. I'm trying, like I said, to check the quality of the stream. It looks like it's buffering a little bit. Please be patient with that, you guys. I hope the audio is okay. Let me know what the audio is like, and I'll try to fix that if that's a problem. Ooh, as you can see, I'm all by myself today because, we need to get out of the house, and Hubs needs to get out and do his thing too. So let me see if I can just get into this discussion, and let me see if I can pull up the comments on my phone, because oddly enough, the reception, or at least the connection, is faster and better on my phone. I don't even understand why that's true, but it is. So let me see if I can connect with you guys this way. So if I'm looking down, I'm not ignoring you. Hey, Leslie. Hey, Tony. Hey, Aaron. Everybody, thanks for joining me on this impromptu edition of Live in Luqman Nation. And I want to talk about a show that I watched that I don't normally watch. I just happened to be off on Tuesday. I took Tuesday, the day after Christmas, off. I was watching television, and I was flipping channels, and I happened upon Megyn Kelly's show on NBC. I'm sure you know that Megyn Kelly has a show on NBC, and she had two guests on her show, which I sat there and watched that segment, and I was horrified. I was ashamed and embarrassed for one of the guests. I was enraged that Megyn Kelly would do this, but then again, I wasn't surprised that Megyn Kelly would do this because it's Megyn Kelly, right? So without taking the time to explain what I'm talking about, I'm going to show you a clip from this show. This is just a clip of a longer segment. The segment's about 7 minutes long, but this clip is about a minute and a half long, and it's from Tuesday's Hopeful Holidays show segment that Megyn Kelly does on her show. Take a look at this.
How about you, Jamel? I mean, you're sitting there knowing the drugs were not yours, that this was completely unfair. Did you feel powerless to stop it?
Oh, totally. There was nothing I can do to stop it. Everything I tried to say or produce Nobody wanted to listen or even hear of it.
Was it a jury trial? How did you wind
Yes,
up?
I had a jury trial.
So the jury did not believe your testimonial?
Not at all. Not at all. I guess not, because when they went in for deliberation, well, they didn't even go back for deliberation. The last jury was at the door, and the judge said something to the juror, and they all came back.
And when you're standing there in court and they say you're going to prison for 10 years, what goes through your head?
Angry, frustrated. I just wanted to, I was hurt, and I wanted to just make somebody pay for this.
And then it's like a miracle, because 3 years in, you find out the cop who's responsible for you being there was himself arrested. And the case against you fell apart. You get released. There's this meeting.
Oh boy, that was just a short segment of this longer show. But you see the problem with this, right? I hope you do, because if you don't, I'm going to explain it to you. I see that a couple other people have joined. Hey, Nessa. You're actually not late, Nessa. Oh, did the video freeze, Tony? I'm sorry. I think it went back. And it'll catch up in a minute. So, okay, let me get to the problem with this segment. Megyn Kelly has this ex-cop on her show who admitted to falsely arresting a man who he knew was not guilty of possession of drugs. He arrested the guy. The guy went to trial. The ex-cop's name was Andrew Collins. He was the white guy in the shot. And the man that he arrested, his name, let me see, I wrote it down because I didn't want to keep calling him the other guy. That would be terrible. Oh, I wrote it down and now I cannot find it. Where did it go? And I wrote it in the margin too. I have 4 pages of notes on this thing. That's how bad this segment is. Jamaris McGee. So Andrew Collins was the ex-cop. He admitted to knowingly arresting somebody who was not guilty. Why did he do it? Because he wanted to be the top cop. And he said that he was willing to do anything and to lie on any official statement to be that top cop. That's what he said in this segment. So Mr. McGee goes to trial. Collins knows that McGee is not guilty by the time he goes to trial. Collins doesn't do anything to stop this. He doesn't give statement at trial. He doesn't alert anyone to the information that he received that Mr. McGee was not the person that he was targeting for arrest. It goes to trial. McGee gets sentenced to 10 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. Not only did he get sentenced to 10 years in prison, but in a portion of that segment, Mr. McGee says to Megyn that the jury didn't even deliberate after the trial was over. He said that they didn't care what he had to say about him being innocent. They didn't want to hear anything he had to say. They obviously didn't believe him, and they didn't even deliberate. When they were going back to the jury room to deliberate, the judge said something to the foreperson, and then they never even went into the room. They came right back and declared him guilty. He gets sent to prison with a 10-year sentence for something he knew he didn't do, and the arresting officer, Andrew Collins, knew that he didn't do. So the change, the twist in this story, because this story is pretty typical, right? This is what happens in our criminal justice system. There are some cops who are crooked, who are willing to lie to send people to jail who they know are innocent because it makes them look good. It increases their stats. It boosts their arrest record. It increases their collars, right? Not all cops, but too many. But there's a twist in this story. A couple of twists, actually. The first twist is that Andrew Collins, a few years after he does this to Mr. McGee, he himself gets arrested for drugs. Now, that is both funny and fitting. A fitting end to the career of a cop who wrongfully arrested an innocent man for drugs. But understand that Mr. McGee wasn't the only person Mr. Collins did this to. And we know that based on something else Collins says in the interview after what he did when he got out of prison. So Collins loses his job as a cop because he gets arrested for drugs and he gets sent to prison, right? Because Collins gets arrested and gets sent to prison, then the cases that Collins brought when he arrested people were all reviewed. And McGee, who was in prison, ends up being released after 3 years because Collins clearly was found to be a dirty cop. It's a travesty enough that an innocent man spent 3 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit because a cop decided that you're going to be the one to go to jail today because it's going to help me look good in becoming that top cop. That's what Collins said he was willing to lie in order to achieve. I'm not making that up. I'll give you a link to the entire Megyn Kelly on Today's segment so you can see that show yourself. Collins admitted to all of this. He admitted to lying on official statements. He admitted to doing it more than once. He admitted to being fine with it in order to advance his career. So Mr. McGee gets out of prison. He obviously can't find a job. He was actually on his way to meet his son. He had just, his girlfriend had just given birth to his son. The day that he was arrested, he was on his way to the hospital to meet his son for the first time. So McGee is sitting in prison for 3 years, never having seen his child. He gets out of prison. He reunites with his son. He can't find a job. But why? Because he has a prison record. Because, see, a lot of times, even if someone is exonerated after they've been in prison, their record might not be expunged. And this seems to have been the case with Mr. McGee. So Collins does his prison time. And he decides that he has to atone for his sins. And he decides this because while he was in prison, he went on a faith journey. And he found the Lord, and he let the Lord into his heart. And the Lord told him that he needed to repent for his sins. The Lord should have. And that's fine and good and wonderful. So Mr. Collins decides when he gets out of prison that he is going to go to the park in the community that he used to serve, hoping to meet all of the people who he had wronged to apologize. This is what Collins himself said he did when he got out of prison. This is how I know that he didn't just do this one time. This was a pattern for him. This was how he operated as an officer of the law. So in the course of sitting in the or standing in the entrance of this park, hoping to see all these people whose lives he'd ruined, to apologize to them, he just so happens, Mr. Megyn is walking through the park that day with his son. And he sees him, he recognizes him, and they exchange words. And at the time, Megyn is like, I ain't got nothing to say to you, dog. Bye. And goes on about his business, because he had just spent 3 years in prison for a crime he did not commit, because Mr. Collins lied. Time goes on. Mr. Megyn can't find a job. He is steered toward a mentorship program to help him with employment and all that kind of stuff. This is where this story gets ridiculous. Now, a former cop who admitted to lying on official records, who was caught with possession of drugs and lost his job, was able to get a job at a nonprofit agency as a mentor. Why? Because he found Jesus. And I'm not at all saying that people can't be rehabilitated and people shouldn't be given a second chance. But think about the different circumstances that Mr. Megyn finds himself in. Mr. Megyn never did anything wrong. He never committed a crime. He goes to prison for 3 years for a crime he didn't commit. He gets out of prison because the cop who arrested him was jammed up and found to be corrupt. But even though he's exonerated, his record isn't expunged, apparently, and he can't get a job. So he's steered to this mentoring program that happens to be the mentoring program that Andrew Collins, the cop who arrested him, is working as a mentor for. And guess who Mr. Megyn's mentor ends up being? Now, this is the second twist in this story, and this was the whole point of this ridiculous ass segment that Megyn Kelly did. And I'm looking at the video, and it's a little choppy, and I apologize, you guys. We're going to work on that and get that straightened out. But I hope the video is okay. I hope the audio, rather, is okay, and you can hear me well. This is where this story gets utterly ridiculous, and this is the only reason this woman had these two men on this show. Because at this point, Mr. Megyn says that, over the course of time, he lets the Lord into his heart, and he eventually forgives Mr. Collins, and then they become best friends, and they call each other brother, and they've written this book together, and this is the power of forgiveness, right? Unfortunately, thank you, Tony. I'm glad the audio is great. At least something's working right. Unfortunately, Megyn Kelly's segment focused on how Mr. Megyn was able to forgive Mr. Collins. That's all her segment focused on, the power of forgiveness. And as a matter of fact, Mr. Collins commented about the current state of racial animosity and tension in the country, especially in regard to abuses by law enforcement. And he suggested that, all we need to do is just forgive each other. And Megyn Kelly repeats this idea that this is what the country needs. The country needs more of this forgiveness. This forgiveness is what's going to heal this rift in our nation between black people and white people, especially in the area of police abuse and brutality. And to that, I say, utter absolute bullshit. That is just some serious plantation propaganda that people are still perpetuating at the end of 2017 and trying to continue to push this narrative that it is black people's job to forgive the people who use the authority and power that they have to abuse us. And that's how we're going to achieve peace in this country. If black people would stop being so bitter, and if we would just forgive our abusers. That is a straight plantation propaganda misinterpretation of what justice is. It is straight out of the playbook of plantations misinterpreting what biblical precepts and scriptures are when it comes to relationships with employers and employees. They tried to misinterpret scripture to make it seem as if God approved of slavery, and if the enslaved didn't like their plot as the enslaved, then they were somehow upsetting the order that God created, and they were the problem by not being happy with their lot. If they were just happy and obedient with their lot and just forgave their master's occasional fits of abuse, then there would be peace and all of this would work better. If you enslaved would just know your place, know your role, and love it. That's the same kind of plantation propaganda that's being used in these kinds of stories. Now, again, I was angry at Megyn Kelly at first, but I'm not surprised that she would. I'm not surprised that she would. I'm not surprised. And I'm actually not surprised that Mr. Megyn would take the position that he did. You know, not saying that he shouldn't forgive Mr. Collins at all as a Christian. Obviously, I believe in forgiveness. But I also understand that forgiveness does not take the place of policy in addressing injustice. I'm looking at the comments here. Yeah, I'm sorry that the video is a little bit choppy. Oh, we're going to fix that. That's so annoying to me. But I'm glad it's clearer and better. See, the problem that a lot of black people who are Christians have in this current struggle, and maybe it's something that we've always struggled with, but I see it more clearly now, so I can attest to it. The problem that we have in this current struggle for social and racial justice, especially for racial justice for our people specifically, is that we misunderstand our faith. We misunderstand that our faith does not tell us to focus exclusively on forgiveness, and that is all we are supposed to do. We don't understand, a lot of us don't understand that ideology that all we're supposed to focus on is forgiving. That's our job, just to forgive. No matter what anybody does to us, turn the other cheek and forgive. And that's how we become godly. That's how we're seen as godly, and God is going to reward us for that. We don't understand that that is plantation propaganda. That is the plantation propaganda of our faith. Bruce said, you're absolutely right, Bruce. It is weaponized Christianity against the very people of faith who don't even understand that Christianity has roots in our motherland, in Africa. And the people who weaponized our faith actually stole it and twisted it and used it against us because they denied us our culture, our heritage, our knowledge, our language. And even if it is true, off on just a little bit of a tangent, even if it is true, even in the cases where it was true, where Africans were practicing Islam before they came to this country, Islam not only recognizes Jesus Christ as a major prophet. They may not recognize him as the savior of mankind, but they do recognize him as a major prophet. They revere him, and they recognize and respect people of the book, otherwise known as Christians. So even Africans who worshipped Islam before they were brought here forcefully, they knew about Christianity. Christianity is interwoven throughout Islam because it's an Abrahamic faith. We have the same spiritual father, Abraham. So many Christians sit on the sidelines of racial justice struggles because we don't understand that we believe the plantation propaganda version of the Christian faith that tells us that all we're supposed to do is forgive our oppressor. While it is true that we are to forgive those, even those who despitefully use us, even those who know that they are abusing us, yes, we're supposed to forgive them. We are also supposed to fight for justice for the oppressed. That's in the Bible too. And just like there are many poor white people who don't believe that they're poor, they just believe that they're temporarily inconvenienced millionaires, so they don't identify with the need for a strong social safety net. You've got a lot of black people who are Christians who don't believe they are oppressed because they own a home or because they're not enslaved anymore. And they don't understand the reality of not just the wealth inequality, but the chasm in between white wealth and black wealth in this country. They do not understand that they live in a system in which black people will have zero wealth in 36 years. They don't understand that we live in a system in which it would take almost as long as we were enslaved to restore what was stolen from us because of slavery. Over 200 years. And our perpetual placement at the bottom of every economic scale in this country is predicated on, it is maintained by denying us justice at every level of society. It is perpetuated and maintained by denying us equal access, equal and full employment, equal opportunity, reparations, fairness in hiring, all of that. All that. Exactly, Tony. It's the I'm doing well, why can't you? It is. There are a lot of black people of faith who believe that if we are Christians, we're just called to forgive. And we don't see ourselves as oppressed because we're not out on the street. We're not struggling. And we don't understand that we are victim to the same kind of plantation propaganda regarding our faith and our position in this country that the enslaved were subjected to. And that is still being perpetrated today by this notion that all black people need to do is forgive. See, Andrew Collins, this ex-cop, admitted that he did this several times. He only stopped his crusade to be the top cop because he was arrested himself. So the only reason Andrew Collins went on this faith journey of his, and I'm not questioning the man's faith journey. I'm sure he's very sincere. Very sure he's sincere. I'm sure he's sincere. But I don't care. From a policy perspective, from a justice perspective, I don't care whether he sincerely found the Lord or not. Not my concern. My concern is, how do we stop people like Andrew Collins from continuing to do the kinds of things that Andrew Collins did to people like Mr. Megyn? And sitting around waiting for somebody to embark on a faith journey to get their heart right, to stop abusing innocent people, is not going to stop that. That's the idea that a lot of Christians, especially black Christians, have about racial and social injustice in this country. We are preached at in our pulpits by black pastors, some of them. And we've got a lot of white so-called religious leaders preaching the same thing, that all we have to do is forgive. We just have to let the Lord, pray for the Lord to work on people's hearts. What about the people who really don't give a rat's ass about the Lord? What about those people who are never going to hear the Lord? until they get caught in their dirt and have to go to prison. Then they've got all this time on their hands when they're in prison to listen to the Lord. Otherwise, when they're out on the street doing what they do, benefiting from what they're doing, they're not paying any attention to the Lord. So what are we doing about those people then? When they don't care about Jesus and the condition of their heart. Plantation Propaganda keeps telling us that we're just supposed to pray for them. And eventually the Lord will change it. But that's not even what the Bible says. Our faith commands that we fight for justice for the oppressed. That we fight against the powers that would take advantage of the poor. That would oppress the widow, that would be discourteous and unkind and hateful to the stranger. That's what our Bible tells us to do. Yes, it tells us to pray. It tells us to have faith and it tells us to forgive. But it also tells us that faith without works is dead. And in too many instances, because people of faith don't put work behind that faith, a lot of people actually do die, literally die. Because we, people of faith, don't think it is our responsibility as people of faith to confront the system as it exists today. We're praying for the kingdom to come. But God put us here to work in this kingdom right now. And this kind of bull that is on Megyn Kelly's show, I'm not criticizing Mr. McGee. I'm not questioning Mr. Collins' faith. They can forgive each other all they want to. I want to know what they are going to do in regard to policy to ensure that what happened to Mr. McGee doesn't happen to anybody else, and that what Mr. Collins did isn't allowed to be done by anybody else in the department, in the police department he worked for. That's what would be beneficial in a tangible, real world way from this kind of forgiveness and brotherhood. These two people coming together to work out ways in which they can influence policy to keep people from being abused by the system, the way this one man was able to abuse the system and the way an innocent man was abused by the system. That's when this spiritual forgiveness works for the benefit of all. Otherwise, all this is an emotional feel-good story that makes people feel good for the holidays and gives people this false sense of moral superiority because, oh, look, see, he forgave. This is what we need to do instead of getting out in the streets with all of that anger like all of those angry black people. I've never understood. Well, yeah, I do understand. It's another part of plantation propaganda. This idea that black people can't be angry. That there's somehow something wrong with us being angry that we are oppressed. That's plantation propaganda too. It's a part of that whole, slaves should be happy with their enslavement. Because, hey, it could be worse. You could be in the wild jungles of Africa where we rescued you from. And if you really want to please God, then you will do all things without complaining. Because the Bible says that slaves are supposed to obey their masters. That's where that whole, we're supposed to be angry. No, we're not supposed to be angry comes from. People misinterpret the scriptures that says be angry and sin not. Don't let the sun go down on your anger. But the very same Bible says that God is angry with the wicked every day. There is not a day that you and I wake up where there are wicked people on this earth who are abusing other people that God is not angry at them. Now, he very well could reduce them all to ash very quickly. But the point is, we're supposed to be his hands and feet. We are made in his image, so we have emotions just like he does. So if God is angry at the wicked every day, I should be angry at the wicked every day too. I'm supposed to be angry at what God is angry at. But the very same people who tell black people that we're not supposed to be angry at our oppression, oh, they're enraged about abortion. They are enraged about people violating the sanctity of life. They want to cut every social safety net program that exists to take care of actual living children. But they are angry that people haven't recognized the embryo and the fetus as a fully idealized human being, and they are going to pass some laws to change that. The very same people who call themselves people of God and religious people, who tell black people in particular that we shouldn't be, if we're really godly, we shouldn't be angry at our injustice. We should just forgive and pray. We shouldn't be out here agitating for political change. They're the very same people who are passing laws to address the issue that they're angry about. They can be angry, but we can't. That's plantation propaganda, y'all. That's the masters and the overseers telling the enslaved and the oppressed what they can and cannot be angry about their situation. And they do that because they've already indoctrinated us into believing their idea of what holiness, righteousness, and godliness is. Because they've detached us from our faith heritage, knowing full well that they stole it. And they're lying about it. But that's all this is. A further perpetuation of this plantation propaganda that tells us that we have no right to be angry that a cop knowingly arrested an innocent man, that a jury didn't even bother to deliberate before they sent him to prison for 10 years, that the system, released him from prison after 3 years, but didn't expunge this man's record, which had a lasting impact on his ability to continue to lead a productive life. We're not supposed to be angry about that. We're just supposed to forgive and call our abuser our brother and write a book and go on Megyn Kelly's show and make people feel good for a bullshit reason that changes nothing. Nothing. Like I said, I'm sure Mr. Collins' faith journey was genuine. I'm sure his crisis of conscience was real, and that he did experience this, and that he did have a realization that he needed a relationship with Jesus Christ. And I'm sure that's very, very genuine and wonderful and fine. What does that do for me? What does that do for all of the other people who live in the community that police department serves? Or patrols, because they don't serve them. Because if you think that Andrew Collins was the only cop who was doing that kind of thing, and even if he was, I guarantee you other cops knew he was doing it. So I'm sure Mr. McGee's relationship with Christ is genuine, and his forgiveness of Mr. Collins is genuine. But what's that do? What's that do for me? What's that do for the people who live in their community who have to deal with these cops every day? Nothing. And that's the other point that we need to make, that we need to understand about our faith, regardless of what your faith is. I don't care if it's Christianity, I don't care if it's Islam, I don't care if it's Judaism, I don't care if it's nothing. It's fine if you don't have any faith at all. Understand that whatever your spiritual belief is, When you have an awareness of injustice, whatever it is you draw upon that lets you know that this is wrong to do to other people, that's when you become responsible for doing something about that injustice that you're aware of. See, my faith is not for me. My faith as a Christian, my conviction as a Christian to know that this is wrong, this is not how you treat immigrants. This is not a part of our ideology as Christians to treat immigrants, the strangers among us, in this way. This is not how we treat women. This is not how we treat the poor. This is not how we treat people of different nationalities. Not according to our faith. So because I know that this is counter to my faith, I have to put work into expressing what I know my faith is. And on behalf of the people who are being abused. And if, as a person of faith, I claim that the only thing I can do is to just pray and forgive and not push for a society that is more fair and more equal and more just for the oppressed, then I am not really a person of faith. My faith means nothing. I may get to heaven. There's even a question about that. Because even the Bible tells us that those of us who think we are quote unquote saved, and we think we've done a bunch of things in the name of Jesus Christ and for God, when we get to heaven, some of us are going to be surprised. And Jesus is going to say to some of us, I have no idea who you are. I did not know you. You didn't do anything for me. And I think, this is just my opinion, not being a theologian or anything, but this is just my opinion, those people, like these folks, who I'm sure they have a very sincere about their faith, but if all they're going to do is write a book and go on a show and talk about the power of forgiveness, but not challenge the system that allows this corruption and oppression to happen so that it doesn't happen to other people, I am wondering how are they representing the Jesus Christ of the turning over of the money changing tables in the temple? How are they representing the Jesus Christ who repelled the crowd that wanted to stone the woman who was caught in adultery after they let the man get away that she was supposedly committing adultery with? We all see you down there, Brewski. Yes. Hello. He says hello. I don't know how these people represent the Jesus Christ who saw the value of equality and humanity in the woman at the well in Samaria. A place where Jews hated Samaritans so much they would go around the town to get to the town on the other side. And Jesus saw the value, the humanity, the equality of this human being, this woman at the well that men wouldn't even talk to publicly because she was a woman, because she was a Samaritan. But Jesus chose her to deliver his message to her people. How are they representing that Jesus? I didn't see that in that segment, in that hopeful holiday segment. That segment didn't give me any hope whatsoever that those two people are going to do anything to challenge and change the system that allowed that corruption and abuse to happen. And it didn't give me any hope that anybody in that audience who were nodding along with that ridiculous story, and anybody who watched and commented on the Facebook page, on the story about how wonderful it is and, oh, this is what we need, at that segment didn't give me any hope that any of those people are going to change anything about this society and this system that allowed Andrew Collins, an ex-cop, to knowingly arrest an innocent man and send him to jail for 10 years. That kind of faith, that kind of forgiveness, that kind of faith journey, that's not gonna change the system. That's gonna make those two people feel good. It's gonna make the people in that audience feel good. It's gonna make the people, some of the people who watched, feel good. Got those two men a book deal, got them on Megyn Kelly's show. Changed not one policy. Changed nothing for the people in that community who have to deal with that police department and other cops in it who are exactly like Andrew Collins, or exactly like he was. Because I'm telling you, he's not the only one. So in 2018, I'm looking over my notes to make sure. Oh, that's right. I can't forget this. I cannot leave this out. There's one point where Collins still places the blame for McGee going to prison on Mr. McGee. It was, you have to watch the interview. Again, I'm going to give you a link to the interview so you can watch the whole thing. But Collins said that that McGee refused to give him his name, that he was so frustrated with me that he wouldn't even tell me his name, as if it's Mr. McGee's fault that Collins arrested the wrong man. Now, Collins is sitting there and he's like, no, I tried to tell him that I wasn't who he said I was. And I don't believe for a second that McGee didn't give Collins his name. But do you see how even when people, some of these people allegedly have these faith conversions, they still have that plantation propaganda in their mind, that white supremacist thinking in their mind, that authoritative thinking in their mind, that you still have to place the blame for the injustice done on the person who was the victim of the injustice. You can't take full responsibility. Oh, Collins apologized. Oh, yeah, I was wrong. And yeah, I was just full of myself. And no, you abused your power and authority and you ruined the life of an innocent man because you knew you could. All the talk of Jesus and my faith journey, and it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter one bit. If you cannot recognize that this was entirely your fault, and it is entirely your responsibility to make sure it never happens again, to do everything in your power to make sure it never happens again. And that is not accomplished by suggesting that the abused have to forgive. And then conversely, Mr. McGee says that, because Megyn Kelly asked him, well, how did he feel when he forgave Collins? And McGee said, well, I felt like I was me again because, I was just consumed with bitterness. And well, yeah. Being bitter for being locked up in prison for something you didn't do, that's a typical human emotion. But when we're not seen as humans, when we're not seen as human beings, we're not expected to respond like human beings. Again, plantation propaganda. One of the ways plantation owners and overseers and white people in general in positions of authority who abused black people in so many ways justified their physical and sexual and emotional abuse of black people was that we didn't have emotions like white people did. We didn't love our children like white people did. We didn't feel pain like white people did. We didn't understand or have the full emotional range like white people did. So whenever we were angry, it was because of some childlike understanding of something, that we didn't have fully developed brains, so we didn't have a fully developed thought process. So we couldn't possibly be angry for legitimate reasons. We were just having temper tantrums because we couldn't get our way like a 5-year-old. So for Mr. McGee to be angry and bitter and wanting justice and wanting someone to make right what was done to him, that's not seen as legitimate because of the plantation propaganda narrative about how black people are as beings and how we are expected to respond when we're abused because of that. And unfortunately, a lot of us have internalized that. We feel guilty when we're angry at people who abuse us. We have a hard time being able to express anger at our continued dispossession, disenfranchisement, and oppression. We're always explaining ourselves, trying to justify why we should be angry and why it's okay, trying to get people to understand why we're angry. We're the only people on the planet who do that. No one else does that. Maybe not the planet, but definitely only people in this country. We're the only group of people who do that. When the descendants of the Japanese Americans who were forced into internment camps and their property taken by the U.S. government, and they were abused so horrendously, they didn't sit around and try to explain to people why they should understand why they deserved reparations. It was really simple. You took our parents' stuff. If there were survivors, you took our stuff. We were American citizens. We had property. We had all the rights as citizens, and you took our citizenship away. You took our property. You forced us into camps. You took our stuff. You owe us. It took a long time. It took a while for them to receive their reparations, and I do believe that their reparations, that little $25,000 they got from each from the Reagan administration, was just a drop in the bucket from what they were owed. But they did get reparations. There wasn't all this hand wringing about, please understand. No, please understand nothing. No, we had 260 plus years, over 2.5 centuries of the free and forced labor of our ancestors that literally built the economy of this country, built the political power of this country. Had there never been slavery, there would never have been an American empire. Cotton was the major exporter during the height of slavery. And it was the plantation economy that produced cotton that not only clothed more than half the world, but also built the American political machine. We were never compensated for that. And then when we were released from enslavement, what little bit we were able to acquire and accumulate, that was taken away from us, literally stolen. Time after time after time. Laws that were passed that were supposed to have been for the benefit of making society more equal on our behalf were fought against from the day they were signed and weakened over time, and also never fully implemented. Ever. Every law. The Civil Rights Act was fought against from the day it was signed. The last one of '64. Every single Civil Rights Act before that was as well. They were toothless. Yes, there has been progress. Absolutely. But understand, there has also been a progression of white supremacy and racism. And we can't fight the progression of white supremacy and racism by just forgiving people who continue to abuse us in this white supremacist system, in this brutal venture capitalist and what's the word, the other word I'm looking for, I've lost it now, but in this absolutely raw capitalist system. We can't stem the tide of the growing inequality, not just between rich and poor, but especially between black people and everybody else, by just forgiving and hoping that these people have a crisis of conscience and a faith conversion and come to Jesus and stop abusing people. We'll be waiting until 3 generations from now die off. And it still will not have happened to the degree that it needs to happen in order to address the inequalities in this society. So this idea that we just need to forgive, we just need to have forgiveness for people, and that's a tactic that black people need to use in response to police brutality and the other political and policy issues that create this inequality that we live under, that's bullshit. And we need to stop believing that plantation propaganda, because that is all it is. It is keeping us inactive and ineffective because of our faith, because of our alleged faith. That's not even our real faith. So, in closing, I feel like I have to say that for 2018, a lot needs to change in the Christian church, especially the black church. I am not hanging my hopes on a whole lot of white people changing. I'm not, because it's been 400 years now, almost 500, that we've been in this experiment, and it's pretty clear that every time we make advancements, we make progress, people come up with new ways to keep things exactly the way they are. That's just true. So for 2018, I'm not in the business of changing people's hearts, changing people's minds. No. It's not my concern how people feel about police brutality, about black people, about poor people, about gay people, transgender people. I'm not concerned about how people feel personally about other people who are different from them. I don't care. The only thing I am concerned about, and I feel like the only thing we should be concerned about, is how do we change the policies that affect people's lives? Who can we get on our side? Enough of this trying to work with people on issues, because focusing on issues all the time and not focusing on the people that these issues disproportionately affect, that's just another way to ignore that black people, Native people, gay people, in particular, are affected worse by a lot of these policies than other groups of people. That's just another deflection from actual identity politics. And there's an article that I have up on our page that explains to you what identity politics really is. And as Christians in 2018, we need to do a lot more activating our faith through works. And some of that work is going to have to be political. It just is. Because the conservative Christians have been activating their faith politically for 40 years. That's where the moral majority came from. That's where the religious right came from. 40 years of indoctrinating and mobilizing conservative white Christians is how we ended up with Trump. 40 years they've been doing this. And for 40 years, too many black Christians have been doing nothing but praying, forgiving, and talking about tithing. We need to stop that. Not saying we need to stop praying, not saying we need to stop forgiving, and I'm not saying we need to stop tithing. Honestly, if the black church gave up some of the money that some of the big mega churches collect in tithes, yeah, that's another show though. Forgiveness is not going to fix the kind of corruption and abuse that people like Andrew Collins have visited upon people like Javon McGee. Forgiveness isn't going to fix that when it happens to the next Javon McGee, when the next Andrew Collins does it. The only thing that is going to affect that, to mitigate that from happening and continuing to happen, is a change in policy. And if liberal, progressive, leftist Christians, and especially black Christians, do not stand up and advocate for ourselves politically on the foundation of our faith, then we will have a lot less than zero wealth 36 years from now. So thanks for joining me on this impromptu stream today, everybody. Oh, let me turn this around. You're absolutely right, Bruce. Power concedes nothing without a demand. We're going to sit up there. These people are passing laws to make it legal for the police to seize your property if they claim they think that you've done something wrong, and you're going to fight that by forgiving them. You're going to fight an unjust law by forgiving the people who are abusing your rights through an unjust law. You're going to fight that by forgiving them. How's that worked out for you? It hasn't. So we need to abandon that as a tactic for addressing racial injustice in this country. I will give you guys the link to the Megyn Kelly Hopeful Holidays segment, whatever it's called, that ridiculous mess. And in the meantime, you guys, we will not have a show on Sunday because it's New Year's Eve. We will probably stream from our New Year's Eve service at our church, because I'm sure our pastor is going to say some radical political thing, because he always does, and tie it to our faith, because that's what we do, and that's why we attend that church. In the meantime, follow us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, share this video. Consider becoming a patron in the coming year. We have a Patreon account, and we also have a GoFundMe account to help with expenses for documentary and travel for conferences that we want to attend and bring to you in 2018. All kinds of stuff. We need your support to do better at our technology, like we need to do today, to figure out this choppy video business. And in the meantime, you all, have an amazing New Year's Eve, a very safe time, and above all else, be very good to each other. Thank you very much for joining me tonight. Peace.